Welcome, everyone. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes.
Bienvenidos todos. Vamos a empezar en unos minutos.
Laying your body on a shag carpet. Oh, you know I love it, so please don't stop it. It's like I'm powerful with a little bit of tender and emotional, sexual bender. Mess me up, yeah, but no one does it better. There's nothing better. That's just the way you make me feel. That's just the way you make me feel.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Bienvenidos a todos. Gracias por unirse a nosotros esta
That's just the way you make me feel. That's just the way you make me feel. So fucking good. That's just the way you make me feel. That's just the way you make me feel. That's just the way you make me feel. You make me feel so fucking good, so good, yeah. That's just the way you make me feel.
Welcome. We're going to start in just a minute. For now, please introduce yourself in the chat.
Vamos a empezar en un minuto. Por favor, mientras, preséntense en el chat.
Pull up another Rari, yeah. Bare feelings that my carry. Pull up another Audi, yeah. I ain't not watching nobody, yeah. Pull up another card, yeah. I ain't not watching nobody but you. Pull up another Lada. But me have the Benz and the Prada. And a couple brand new order. All of them fully don't matter. 0 to 102. Yeah, some flex on you. All in on my section view, I set for you. Then me get a text come true, so I'ma show you what my legs can do. Pull up another party, yeah. I ain't not watching nobody, yeah. Pull up another Rari, yeah. Bare feelings that my carry. Pull up another Audi, yeah. I ain't not watching nobody, yeah. Pull up another card, yeah. I ain't not watching nobody but you. I don't play, you will never ever find another like me, yeah. You should know you made my day, and I lost my horse when you came my way. Really changed my mood, Oh, you're so rude, yeah. Then I try push up intrude, but you're well subtle and smooth, yeah. Pull up another party, yeah. I ain't not watching nobody, yeah. Pull up another Rari, yeah. Bare feelings that my carry.
All right, I think we can get started.
Bueno, creo ya podemos empezar.
Before we get started, we're going to have the Tilde team set up interpretation and give us some instruction. Passing it to you, Mojde.
Thank you. Antes de empezar, vamos a darles instrucciones para acceder a la interpretación. Buenas tardes a todos. Felicitamos a los organizadores de este evento por su firme determinación de facilitar la comunicación bilingüe hoy. Mi nombre es Mojde, mi cointérprete es Abraham y representamos a la Cooperativa de Justicia del Lenguaje Tilde. Estaremos ofreciendo interpretación simultánea de inglés a español y de español al inglés. Good afternoon, everybody. We congratulate the organizers of this event for their firm commitment to facilitating bilingual communication. My name is Mojde, my co-interpreter is Abraham, and we represent the Tilde Language Justice Cooperative. We'll be providing English-Spanish and also Spanish-English simultaneous interpretation. Si usted se unió a la reunión con su teléfono, por favor, asegúrese de entrar con el app de Zoom para poder acceder a la interpretación. Esta función no está disponible en los Chromebook. If you joined on your phone, please make sure to join on the Zoom app so that you can access interpretation, but please note that this function is not available on Chromebook. Si usted prefiere escuchar y participar en español, por favor seleccione su canal de idioma haciendo clic abajo a la derecha de su pantalla de Zoom, en el globito si usa una computadora o en los 3 puntitos si está conectada por teléfono. Seleccione interpretación, luego español y luego picarle en Done o listo. If you prefer to listen and participate in English, please select your language channel. Go to the bottom right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. Click on the globe if you're using a computer or the 3 dots if you're connected by phone. Select interpretation, click English, and click Done at the end. Algunas pautas, a few guidelines. Yo estoy hablando rápido porque estoy dando esta introducción en ambos idiomas, pero ustedes, por favor, no hablen muy rápido. Eso pasa especialmente cuando uno esté leyendo una presentación o emocionada, nerviosa o al tener poco tiempo. También si no están hablando, por favor pongan su audio en silencio. I'm speaking fast right now because I'm doing this introduction in both languages, but y'all please don't speak fast. This happens especially when reading a presentation or excited, nervous, or running out of time. And if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. Por último, les vamos a recordar que por favor hablen una persona a la vez en un solo idioma por oración y solo hablan en el idioma del canal que escogieron. Si usted es bilingüe español-inglés, no necesita escoger un canal y puede hablar en cualquiera de esos 2 idiomas. Lastly, we remind you to please speak one person at a time with one language per sentence and only speak in the language of the channel you chose. If you're bilingual Spanish-English, you don't need to choose a channel and you can speak in either of these languages. Estos espacios se crean con el apoyo de todos. Por favor, comunique cualquier problema por el chat o habilitando su micrófono. Gracias. We create these spaces with everyone's support, so please make sure to communicate any issues by chat or turning on your volume. Thank you for creating this multilingual space.
Thank you to Abe and Mojde from the Tilde interpretation team. We are so thankful to have you here so that everyone can understand this incredible event that we have going on tonight. So I would like to formally welcome you. My name is MaryGrace DiMaria. I work at the Center for Innovation in Worker Organization based at Rutgers University. And this event tonight that highlights the Always Essential program and the Always Essential program and the power of storytelling as a mobilizing tool is a part of our Workers Innovating New Strategy series, our WIN series, where we highlight innovations in the worker justice movement. And before we get started, it's a practice at CWO, which is what we call our center for short, to acknowledge the labor and land that our institution sits upon. And we do this because we believe in the importance of sharing the history of place and labor, especially when that history is something that is not commonly talked about or acknowledged. We want to do that here. So we would like to acknowledge that the Rutgers University is in New Jersey in the United States, but it is on unceded Lenni Lenape territory, native territory here. And we also want to acknowledge the legacy of stolen people and extracted labor that continues to harm Black people, Brown people, and immigrants around the globe. It is within these thoughts in our hearts and our minds that we continue to seek knowledge about the ways that we can more fully honor and bear witness to those whose shoulder and whose lands we stand upon. And this is a practice that we're integrating at CWO, as I said, and Jackie has put it in chat, an invitation for you. If you have never identified the indigenous land that you're calling in from, that you live on, this is a link that you can do so, and that's in the chat. And we want to formally welcome any folks that are joining the call today that are Indigenous. Thank you for joining us, and we're happy to have you here. Next, before we get started, just wanted to give a brief overview of what the Center for Innovation in Worker Organization, CIWO, is. We are a program, a center that strengthens economic justice organizations, supports movement building, and incubates strategies that strengthen democratic institutions and shift power towards economic, racial, and gender justice. And we do this through a number of programs. Our innovation program, which is where the Always Essential program and this series, the WIN series, sits. Bargaining for the Common Good, which graduates who we have here of the Always Essential program should be very familiar with. How does community organizations and labor organizations come together to demand bigger and bolder changes in our communities and for our movement? Build the Bench, which brings together people who are managing worker justice organizations, worker centers, in order to effectively kind of build the capacity of those organizations so that they are sustainable and supportive. And Will Empower, which is an organization that particularly supports BIPOC, Black, Indigenous women of color in their work as leaders in their organizations of worker justice movements. So that is an overview of who CIWO is. And now I'm very excited to introduce, have my co-moderator, Mara, introduce herself, because me and Mara will be your moderators for the evening before we send it over to Javier, who will be the MC for the Story Slam. So Mara, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, MaryGrace. My name is Mara Ventura, and I am currently a senior organizer with Jobs with Justice, and previously did both union organizing and worked as an organizer and a director with North Bay Jobs with Justice, and got the opportunity through some of my organizing work, both long time with workers and with Jobs with Justice, to jump into the Always Essential Fellowship program. So very excited and feel very privileged to be here. Thanks, MaryGrace.
And by jump in, Mara means take a vision, operationalize it, and create a program that has impacted many people and graduates of the fellowship and seeded an incredible program. Thank you, Mara. And next slide to Casey. I just want to say a big thanks to Jackie and Casey from CIWO, who are providing behind the scenes support to this webinar tonight. And again, to Mojde and Abe for providing interpretation support to us. Thank you so much. And with that, let's get started. So how the flow is going to go tonight, y'all, is that we're going to start with an overview of the Always Essential program for those who are not familiar with it. And then we're going to go into 2 rounds of panels talking about, from Javier's point of view as a core lead trainer and developer of the curriculum for the Always Essential Fellowship. Why have a narrative focus? Why focus on storytelling? If we're talking about organizing, if we're talking about bargaining, what does storytelling have to do with that? And then we're going to hear from graduates of the Always Essential program and talk to them about what it was like to learn their story, share their story, and participate in the fellowship. And from there, we're going to go into a story slam where 7 fellows are going to share the stories that they shared during the program. So with that, I'm going to pass it to you, Mara, to get us started. Talk to us about the fellowship, how it got started.
Yeah, thanks, MaryGrace. So, just a little background about the Always Essential Fellowship and how it got started. As we know, in 2020, we were hit by this global pandemic, and this was really also a time where organizations like Jobs with Justice, the National Domestic Worker Alliance, Bargaining for the Common Good, a handful of national labor organizations came together to say, our workers are experiencing something very similarly, not just as essential workers, and as this term was really coined for workers across the country on the front lines when everything needed to shut down, but these workers needed to continue to work, and at that time in very dangerous conditions, without a vaccine, without very much information, and really also that these were the organizations that were already at the front lines of supporting workers who had largely already been pushing an agenda for worker safety and worker dignity across the country. And so as these organizations brought folks together, ultimately over 50 organizations became part of this incredible Always Essential coalition. They also envisioned what it might mean to then bring some of these workers together online to not only support the work that they were doing on the ground with pushing an agenda forward for essential workers, but also to ensure that they actually saw themselves in this term of essential work. So what did it actually mean to leverage this term that the media was coining and to actually turn it into something that became part of an identity that really emblazoned some of the work that they had already been doing before the pandemic into a united movement, cross-sector, cross-industry, cross-organization, and geographically, along with workers doing this, being impacted by the pandemic across the world. So really this fellowship was this came out of this amazing coalition and also just this vision of what is it that essential workers on the ground really need. So the main goals were really to provide practical skills. So we really made sure that we built a fellowship that specifically brought in essential workers who were already in campaigns, whether they were furthering campaigns before the pandemic, or in most part, these were workers that really came out of what was happening in 2020 to build an identity so that they saw themselves as part of a larger movement, essential workers, and as an opportunity to develop and publicize their own analysis and problems and solutions around the pandemic, and really begin to shape what policies came out of everything that we were addressing at that time. Next slide. So, just as an overview of some of the folks we brought in, our cohort reached in total 54 workers. Each cohort lasted 6 months long, and we had anywhere from 14 workers to 25 workers, depending on the cohort. We really actually started with supporting workers like one of the workers today, Calypso Levy, that you're going to hear from today, who were trying to leverage opportunities to create sustainable voices for themselves, beyond the pandemic. So Calypso was at the forefront of building the nation's first essential worker board, throughout the county, and that got established in Harris County. So, we started our first cohort supporting any workers that were trying to do some kind of negotiations outside of collective bargaining agreements. And then we also just did our general organizing cohorts as well. So in total, it was 54 workers. We had a majority of women. We had gender non-binary fellows. We had a large majority of BIPOC fellows. A third of our fellows were Spanish speaking as their predominant language. And half of our fellows came from rural or ex-urban places. And every single fellow that came in, all 100% of them were working on essential worker campaigns outside of a collective bargaining agreement, which we thought was really key. And that was not what we necessarily set out to do, but we think that hits at really where the need was for worker development and leadership development. Workers went through 6 months of over 18 classes between our main trainers and our guest trainers. And later today, MaryGrace is going to talk a little bit about the importance of language justice, but a good portion of our classes were in Spanish as much as they were in English, so that we were, attentive to the folks that were in the room. And on top of that, fellows also each got a monthly one-on-one with either a trainer or the staff organizers running the fellowship. And this is just a collection of the 13 organizations that put in fellows, many of which came back for every cohort because they felt it was such a helpful and powerful place for their worker leaders and their organizers to be.
Great. And here on the screen, we have kind of a sample 6-month curriculum. The curriculum did shift from the beginning of the fellowship. And one of the reasons why it shifted was after the first 2 cohorts, we assembled a curriculum development committee, and some of the fellows, the graduated fellows, actually joined that committee and informed the curriculum for 2022 to 2023. And some of the conversations that we had was, after the fellowship, what content did you find yourself using? Like, what lessons did you find yourself coming back to? And what do you feel like was missing based off of, or like, what do you feel like you could really need that would support your organizing? And an example of something that was added to the curriculum was talking to press, working with media. That was added in the most recent curriculum because so many of the graduated fellows were talking to press. And we knew that this next class of fellows would, of course, likely have similar experiences. So we wanted to make sure they were tooled up around that. So as you can see here, storytelling and advanced storytelling is a core component, kind of the thread that runs through classes, but there are 2 to 3 classes that are just specific around honing in and telling your own story. Labor history, specifically around leaders that are not often spoken about when thinking about the labor movement. Understanding our power as leaders, as organizers, digital organizing and social media as a tool to organize, base building and effective one-on-ones. In those classes, we utilize role plays, peer coaching, etc., to just really talk about the realities of organizing your coworkers. So we got to talk through a lot of real scenarios and some of the frustration and the hardness and the challenges around doing that. Corporate campaigning and bargaining for the common good, how to identify a leader, working with media, as we said, the core elements of a campaign, organizing members for escalation, and then peer coaching throughout. Next slide. And as Mara talked about, excuse the Spanish translation here on the top. That's a typo by me. But there is a commitment to language justice throughout this program. And the way that we really operationalized that was that, every email was translated, every class was interpreted. If we had capacity, we would also translate the chat during Zooms because a lot of conversation ends up happening in the chat. And there were also extra classes that Javier held in previous cohorts for Spanish speakers to ensure that they were getting, understanding, and applying the curriculum, especially if it was, a class that was like, maybe the presenter ended up talking really fast and, just wanted to make sure that there was an equal experience, quality of experience for every single fellow. We also really want to shout out the importance of consistent interpreters, one of which we have today. So a big shout out to Mojde. Mojde was with us across the cohorts, and the benefit of that is that interpreters get to learn the fellows alongside of us. They get to learn the content, and it feels like having another facilitator, like another partner in this work. And that's how I felt personally with Moj Day on the team, and just an extra level of support to ensure that the quality of experience was the same for Spanish speakers. We had Javier as lead trainer, who's fluent in Spanish, and then program coordinator Valeria, who was also fluent in Spanish, and she was doing one-on-ones with fellows regularly, texting, chatting, calling in Spanish and English, and was always there as a support. And a real rule is that if someone was speaking fast during a presentation, there was no politeness around stopping them throughout the presentation, no matter how many times it took, to ensure that they were speaking slowly enough for everyone to hear and for it to be properly interpreted. And if that was something happened and that was not possible, we would take the time to get a transcript of the recording to ensure, and then send that to Spanish speakers as well. So we really want to just name that. That feels like such a core component of making this program accessible. Next slide, Casey. And an incredible piece of work that Mara did at the end of this last cohort is that she went back and talked to every ED, every organization that participated in the fellowship over the last 3 cohorts, and got their feedback and did a really incredible report that's linked at the end of this presentation, and themed out learnings. And these are the learnings that came from organizational feedback. So one of them is that this program fills a gap that smaller organizations were not able to do. So being able to have a 6-month training program that is bilingual, that offers monthly coaching sessions and trainers that are accessible to fellows, that covers a wide range of organizing and bargaining topics, is something that, of course, it is hard to provide as a small organization. It's hard to provide as a big organization. And the fact that we were doing this across the country, which we'll talk about too, and introducing fellows to one another, and allowing them to network with one another, gave like truly a wealth of experience and exposure that smaller organizations said that they would not have been able to do on their own. Another piece is that the equity funds and laptops were key ways for leaders to be involved in this program. So I don't know, I'm not sure if we mentioned on this before, but we provided stipends, which we called equity funds, for fellows to participate. Laptops were provided, hotspots were provided if needed, because many times fellows would be joining us, from like driving trucks, dropping off packages for Amazon, etc. And bandwidth was obviously low in those scenarios. But showing that we value people's time by providing pay and resources is a core part of this program, and supported participation. Next was that short-term trainings weren't enough for the cost and resources it required. So the fact, like I said, that this was a 6-month training that went so in depth with the same cohort of folks, that also created another group for fellows to tap into, was completely invaluable. And another piece around that too was just having a long-term training allowed us to see over time how these learnings were shaping campaigns. And different examples were brought up around, like, Charity, I know that you're organizing X, Y, and Z. Like, let's talk about how the one-on-one, these learnings from the one-on-one can apply with the one-on-ones that you're doing right now. Or we had fellows organizing Dollar Trees and like having conversations about identifying leaders there. So really being able to apply those learnings and see how they're shaping campaigns over time was really important. Organizations also said that the fellowship directly and quickly impacted their leaders' ability to step into new roles, build stronger bases, and some even move into paid positions or more leadership positions in their community. That this was the support, this was the leadership development opportunity that they needed to push them into, you know, the next step in the ladder of engagement, either at their organizations or within their community, wherever they were organizing. Finally, the national scope of the fellowship helped transform how leaders saw themselves. So being able to connect across sector, beyond sector, region, etc., really showed folks how similar struggles are, even like from within retail to construction, like what are the similarities, and to build connections from there. And Mara, I'll pass it to you to close out, but there is, and we're gonna send out the presentation where you could click all these links, but this is the report of all the quotes from organizations about the fellowship that we're happy to share.
Thanks, MaryGrace. Yeah, I just wanted to end really by saying that it wasn't just an incredible experience to get to help put this fellowship together and then, you know, do it in such a collective and amazing way with folks like MaryGrace and Javier, Valeria, and Mojde, but, you know, also that the opportunity to spend 3 months last year after our final cohort ended, just listening to the directors and the organizers of all of the 13 organizations that participated, on top of all of the exit interviews that we had done with all 54 of the fellows, was very inspiring and just really validating at how incredibly needed and how vital a program like this Always Essential Fellowship is right now. As you can see in some of the quotes, like people really told us overwhelmingly that participation in this fellowship catapulted the leadership development of their worker leaders in ways that likely would never have happened if they had not had so much of this wraparound support, and that they felt like the Always Essential Fellowship was a critical part of the success of their campaigns. And without hesitation, 100% of the organizations told us that they would participate again. And some did. You know, some organizations participated in every single cohort or came in halfway and said, we want to keep going. And, you know, we say this because we want to really continue this fellowship. We want it to keep going, not just because we are biased and we loved it, but because of how much it's shown that this is a huge gap in the labor movement right now, in the work that we're doing, where we are not able to hire and find the type of organizers that we're looking for, and that there are so many amazing worker leaders that we're pulling into our work, and our organizations don't have the additional resources and capacity, particularly of our own organizers, to provide them with extra hours of leadership development that they deserve and need. And so this fellowship fills that gap. And last year, after we finished our last cohort, we did 3 months of just listening to all of these directors validate how needed and important this fellowship was. We then pulled together organizations, national labor leaders, funders, all across the labor movement together to talk about the fellowship and hear from them whether this was something they were also hearing was a gap in our movement work and a gap for the vision that we want to move forward with. And it was. So we want to continue that conversation. Our vision is that we're able to pull together a steering committee at some point that wants to continue this fellowship. But in the meantime, we want to continue that conversation and hold a second meeting. So we're inviting any of you who are interested in coming to the table and collaborating with one another about how a fellowship or a program like this can fill the need for the work that you want to do, whether it's building people up in the South, whether it's amplifying Black leadership, whether it's ensuring that immigrant workers are continuing to have the support that they need in a time that's so critical. Like whatever your vision is for your organization, this fellowship has the potential to fulfill that need. We're excited. Our fellows want to come back. Some of them came back to the table and designed the next cohorts. We want you to be in community with us. And we think that the reason that this fellowship is so powerful is because it came together through a coalition and through a collective. And we want to continue that, and we hope you'll join us. So with that, I'll let us get into the fun part of tonight.
Thank you, Mara. Thank you. Thank you. That is the overview of the Always Essential program. And like we said, like we want to be in conversation with you around this. We want your brilliance helping to fill this gap. And we need all that. We know we need all the help that we can get. So we invite you to join us. And next up, I would like to bring up to the stage Javier Morillo, who is currently working with the Movement Voter Project as the Senior State Strategy Director, overseeing grant making in the Midwest and Southwest. But he previously served as president of SEIU Local 26 in Minnesota, a property service union that doubled its size to 8,000 memberships under his leadership, in a role that he stepped down in 2019. He has been a central figure in forging innovative community labor partnerships in Minnesota and translated that experience to consulting work with national and state-based organizations and campaign. And the thing about Javier is he's also an incredible and renowned storyteller who's had his work featured on National Public Radio's The Moth Radio Hour, and his recent work on police unions written in the aftermath of the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis has been influential nationally and noted in the New Yorker and NPR's Planet Money. So Javier served as the lead trainer and facilitator for the Always Essential Fellowship in 2022 and was an active trainer, mentor, curriculum developer for the fellowship since its inception in 2020. Javier brought, I can say, a wealth of nuts and bolts organizing and bargaining knowledge to the class, but really like a deep commitment to worker leadership and, of course, like authentic storytelling. Not to be on message and not to say the right thing or not to be scripted, but like really, who are you? Who is all of you? And what brings you here? Like what makes you feel powerful? Tell us a story about that. And, you know, I can speak for all of us to say the fellowship would not be as impactful if it wasn't for Javier's leadership and vision. So let's give it up for Javier, and then we're going to ask him some questions.
Thanks, MaryGrace.
So Javier, we want to hear from you about, you know, this fellowship, bringing together essential workers to learn to organize, to bargain, to do leadership development. Like, why did you bring a narrative focus into that?
Well, so first, thanks, and thanks for putting this night together, and for everyone for coming tonight. So, stemming from my experience at Local 26, you know, I think it was always very clear to me, and became like increasingly clear with as the years went on, that winning campaigns, that when we won campaigns, it was because we told a better story than the boss did, and that was actually a goal of campaigns. That what we needed to do is to communicate a very clear story, and then in my work with both the union and then in the and after, and working with national and community organizations across the country, there was like I would consistently hear that there's a vacuum that needed to be filled, and that is that organizations almost universally report just having like lacking capacity when it comes to communications and narrative. That like I would talk to organizations doing amazing work and ask them like, have you had a chance to tell this story? And they'd sort of like sigh and say, oh, if only, right? Because we go from campaign to campaign. And we don't have that capacity. And so I've thought for a long time that part of what we need to do in movement work is like, since we're not going to solve communications capacity with hiring communications director for every single organization, that would be lovely. But resource wise, right? We make these tough choices in organizations between like, do we hire an organizer or a communications director? And I will hire an organizer. So what we need to do is create cultures of storytelling in our own organizations, and become better tellers of our own story of the work that we do. And the third, I guess, major thing that I'd say in terms of answering this question is that I think that
Javier, slower.
I am going way too fast. Sorry, I'm out of practice, Mojdeh. Yes, so MaryGrace said earlier that that we were ruthless about stopping when presenters were speaking too fast, and I just committed that sin. So I'm going to pause and remind myself to go much more slowly. But the third reason I'd give for why I wanted to focus on narrative is that this is not just a problem of movement organizations. I think we feel it in our bones. You know, those of us who believe in justice, when we watch TV, when we read the news or hear the news, that the way we would tell our stories is not what gets out there, right? That the right wing is so effective at telling stories that hurt us, and that and the media buys it, and the culture often buys it, and that we really that I fundamentally believe that when we become better tellers of our own personal stories, when we become better tellers of the stories of our organizations and our organizing work and the communities that we come from and that we organize in, that when we become better tellers of the world that we want to see, that we will actually build that world. We will create that world. So I think it is, to me, it is intrinsic to the work of organizing. It's not a side thing. It's not and I think often we think of communications as a side thing, as something that someone needs to do. But in fact, it's integral to the work that we do and the kind of world we want to create.
Thank you, Javier. And I hear you talking so much about how storytelling is a strategy, and the importance of the weaving. And I remember hearing about when I joined the fellowship in 2022, how, you know, it was under your suggestion that the final class of the fellowship was a story slam, right? And that it was important to have an event like that, and the program to close out the cohort. And I know that at Local 26, you also had a story slam there, and that it was a practice of doing that. So, you know, there's the strategy bit where it is more strategic to incorporate stories to make our movement stronger. But what do you see the purpose is around an event like that, around sharing stories with one another?
Yeah, so I think that, right, I think that when we talk about the power of storytelling, this is, I think, like an everyday practice. But like at Local 26, what I like, and to take a step back, MaryGrace mentioned that I've been on the Moth Radio Hour, and I've worked with the Moth for some time. I host the Moth Story Slam in the Twin Cities, and years ago, years ago, probably 2012 or something, I listened to the Moth Radio Hour. And for those of you who do not know, it is a story. It is true stories told live, and National Public Radio has a show where recordings of stories are shared. And I had said to my husband, it's like, I want to beyond that. I want to do that. And I want to tell the story about this janitor strike in Houston. And when I ended up in the Houston City Jail for 37 hours, along with like 54, I believe, other members and leaders who were protesting, like, because janitors were trying to win their first union contract. And then I did that. I pitched my story to the Moth, and I ended up telling that story on stage. And I think for a while I thought of storytelling in my own life as something kind of like it was something I did, like there was the work, there was organizing work, and then I did this fun thing.
Mhm.
It is fun thing for myself. And then, like, when I sort of made that connection that I talked about earlier about that, this is actually what we do. Well, when we win campaigns, we are telling a story, and we are telling a story more effectively than those who are opposing us. Sort of making that connection, and then I started. I love that. All my heroes have been in handcuffs. That's in the chat. I'm making that connection, and we started incorporating storytelling in my leadership retreats and the union's staff and board retreats, and just adopted the slam format of people coming up and telling a 5 to 6 minute story. And what I realized that, the thing about storytelling is, like, so in my job as president of the union, I did a lot of public speaking, and I worked a lot in politics. I do a lot of public speaking, and people might say, oh, they sometimes hear from friends, like, I don't know how you do that. I get so nervous. I don't like public speaking. But storytelling is different, right? We all tell stories all day long, right? You think about it, like, you come home from work and, like, oh, how was your day? Oh my gosh, remember my coworker so-and-so who I told you about? Well, today she was in rare form. You'll never believe what she did. Like, we just connect with each other through stories as human beings. And it's an everyday thing that we do. But there's a kind of magic to taking that every day and making a ritual of it, and actually even making a contest of it. Because in the process of doing that and formalizing and what we're calling here, the story slam, and why we did this as essentially our graduation for the program, was because, and I think, like, this happened with some of the storytellers we'll hear tonight, right? That people who are leaders often start out saying, oh, my story is not important. Oh, I don't have a story. I'm in it for the workers. I'm in it for my coworkers. I'm in it for us, right? And we all have stories. We all have stories that explain why we do what we do. Not every worker stands up to be a leader. Some of these stories we'll hear tonight started out from conversations we had with people to say, like, yeah, but help me understand why are you in this fellowship? What brought you to this place in the world? And when we learn to tell our own stories, and this is what I always say, when people say, like, oh, my story is not important, is that learning to become better tellers of our own stories trains us to become better listeners of other people's stories. And people who are organizers know that listening for stories is key to moving someone who you're organizing, who you're working with, to move a worker from the place where she is feeling fearful and scared of going on strike, to that moment when she signs the strike authorization, to that moment when she's actually on the picket line. That's a journey, and that part of what you do to help folks be on that journey is to listen for what motivates them. Like, maybe that worker is saying, I have kids at home, or I have kids in my home country that I'm providing for. And so you're listening for stories because that helps you move the person, because stories move us. And so to me, formalizing and creating a ritual out of it, and having a story slam is in addition to just like to paying attention to storytelling as something, as an integral and an intrinsic part of organizing. I do think that there's also something really valuable with kind of ritualizing it, formalizing it, because it makes that everyday magic that we experience, it makes it as special as it really is. It really brings, say like, so that's why, for our guest tonight, that's what, we have the special Zoom background, and we played up, and we did these kind of like as a graduation event, and invited leaders of their organizations to attend, because it is really special, because it's a really freaking special thing to decide to tell your story, because although storytelling is something we do every day, and it is different than public speaking, you don't normally do the kind of storytelling you do every day. You don't do it with a spotlight on a Zoom to you, or on a stage with the lights on you. And so it adds something special to that. And I think that's really important.
It really is, Javier, and it was really felt in all the support that you gave people leading up, and all the prep that we did. And that makes me ask too, like, just to close this out, like, if someone is hearing you right now and saying, I want to do this, I want to do this at my union, I want to do this at my organization, can you talk through kind of the step-to-step process that you used as a facilitator to build up to the story slam, and what type of curriculum support you did to make that possible?
Yeah, so one thing we did was, especially in the second year of the cohort, was infuse the storytelling workshop. I think the first year we did the workshop as one of the classes, and when we changed the curriculum, we actually broke it up over several classes. I think that helped us make the point that storytelling is relevant to all the other things we're talking about when it comes to organizing. And we start with very simple writing prompts. One writing prompt is called I Remember, where and all of the writing prompts would ask people to write for 5 minutes, to time them. And the only instruction is you write for 5 minutes, pen to paper, don't lift your pen from the paper. And the prompt that's I remember, you say, I remember, ... and then you start writing. And if you get stuck, you just write the words I remember again, until you're unstuck. And those writing prompts, I think, without the fear of grammar, punctuation, am I doing it right, whatever, and it's like, no, your only job is to keep writing. And if you can't think of what to write, just write that writing prompt. That has, I think it has the impact of I think freeing people up, like you get out of the mode of like, I'm not a writer, I'm not whatever, we're just doing this thing. And I like to focus writing prompts as well on moments outside of work. I think we often in the organizing world make the mistake of implicitly defining the workplace as the center of everyone's lives, because that's where we do our work. That's where, we're trying to improve working conditions, but people don't work for the sake of working, right? We all work because it gives us the ability to have the lives that we would like, the lives that bring us joy. I work to provide for my family so that my kids can go to school, so they can have a better future than I had. Those are the things that are most important. And so, we tried to use writing prompts that move us in the direction of thinking of ourselves as we are, as full human beings. And so what we do in the fellowship is, throughout storytelling and our personal stories are woven throughout, so that it's not just a thing we do this one time, but we relate it, so that when we talk about labor history and about the hidden stories of labor history, we relate that to our own stories. When we talk about campaigns, we relate that to our own storytelling. It is infused throughout the work. Storytelling, the organizations that do storytelling workshops, I've developed one that is the storytelling workshop that we use in the fellowship. But I think that to me, always the goal should be to infuse all of the work we do with the power of the everyday power of storytelling.
Ooh. Everyone, give it up for Javier. Thank you so much, Javier, for, I'm going to say, show term, unveiling the curtain on what it takes to actually put this into practice, because, these things seem small, but like these acts of ritual are memorable. And they show, like, they bring so much love into the room. They connect us with one another, and that is just core to everything. And like, just want to give you an enormous thank you for bringing yourself, your and your vision around storytelling into this fellowship. It really is staying in our hearts and mind forever. And I hope that it spreads to other folks in this room who are interested in incorporating it into their organizing work. Thank you so much. So we're going to hear from Javier, our MC, in just a few. But for now, we want to bring up Mara and some fellows who are graduated to tell us about their perspectives as sharing their story, crafting their story in the fellowship.
Great, thanks, MaryGrace. Yeah, do we have the slide? Yeah, that's it. Awesome. So thank you so much, first and foremost, to a whole bunch of our fellowship graduates who were willing to come back and talk a little bit about their experience, and particularly in the storytelling piece of our curriculum, which, as you just heard, was a huge part and so important to us. And we'll just speak from a personal experience. When we first brought in Javier as one of our trainers in the first fellowship, I participated in his storytelling activities as a participant, as one of the fellows. And same as you, Bobby, I still have my writing prompts. And, after organizing for, at that time, I had been like, I don't want to date myself, but more than a decade, I will say that. I had been through so many storytelling workshops and never really felt like I connected or felt like I found my story. It always felt very performative. And I always just thought it was just me, like that was just a me problem. And it wasn't until I started going through Javier's workshops and really listening to him talk about storytelling, and I'm sure many of you all can agree, that I found my story, and I realized how much we are oftentimes trained to tell our stories through the lens of our campaigns or through the lens of the organizations that we're volunteering with or that we're leaders in. And Javier really taught us to pull ourselves out of that space and to learn to tell the stories of us outside of just the work we do or the activism that we do. And that was such a powerful thing to learn. So I hope you all feel the same way, and really just thank you for being on this panel, because we want to hear really your experience and like what it meant for you to go through this fellowship and really think about the storytelling piece. So the first question that I have for you all is, at the end of the fellowship, we did a story slam where everybody shared a story. And many of you had time to think about that story. And for some of you, the stories that you thought you were going to tell at the end of the fellowship changed. So I'd love to just hear, what was it like for you to perform your story at the end of the fellowship for everyone in the fellowship and and audience members that came? Do you want me to call on you? Is there someone that just feels moved to start first?
I can go.
Okay, Bobby. Yeah.
So, doing my personal story for Story Slam, I actually wrote like 9 drafts of it before I came up with the final story. And I spent so much time, and Javier really helped me to focus on what moved me personally, what I did personally, what my thoughts and feelings were, because in my storytelling, I was pointing the finger at other people that I thought were heroic and wonderful, but I wasn't really so much talking about where I fit into that. So it was just like super, super empowering to be able to tell my story and to know that I wasn't alone and that other people could relate to it too. And it was just stinking amazing.
I love that. I loved that it gave you that feeling of connectedness to one another. That's amazing. Who else? What did it feel like for you all to perform your story at the end of the fellowship?
Me gustaría
I
compartirla.
would like to share.
Buenas tardes, soy Ana.
Good afternoon. I'm Anna.
Principalmente cuando
And
nos
mainly
sugirieron,
when
¿verdad?, hacer esto,
it was suggested to us to do this,
dije, oh
I
no,
said,
me voy a
oh
exponer a
no,
todo mundo.
I'm going to expose myself
Siempre
to
el temor,
everybody.
¿verdad?
Always
Y
fear.
después
And
lo
then
miré como una
I looked at
oportunidad
it
de darme a
like an
conocer con los demás
opportunity
compañeros y
for
compañeras.
my other
Pero
colleagues,
a la
classmates, to
misma
get to
vez,
know me, but at the
el
same time,
reconocer
to recognize
todas estas habilidades
all
que yo
these
tenía
abilities that
y
I
que
had
nunca me di el tiempo
and that I never gave
de,
myself the time
de admirarlas, ¿verdad?
to
De
admire them
reconocerlas
or
en
to
mí misma.
recognize them in myself.
Y cuando tomas el
And
lápiz y
when
empiezas a escribir acerca de
when
ti,
you start to take a pen and you start
te
to
quedas
write about
pensando, wow,
yourself,
yo
you
soy
think,
esa persona.
wow, am I this person?
Como ya lo comentaban anteriormente, los
Like somebody else commented,
no nos
other
hace tiempo
other classmates, we don't take the time for
y
ourselves
estamos mirando todo a
and
nuestro
we're
alrededor.
looking all around us to other
Y
people.
finalmente,
And
la verdad,
at
yo me
the end
quedé
of the day,
sorprendida
I
porque
was so
ese día
surprised
nació
because
otra
that
Ana.
day a different Anna was born.
Quiero agradecerles
And
por
I want
la
to thank
motivación,
you for the
el apoyo y los
motivation
recursos
and
que
the
nos
support and the
ofrecieron para
resources that we
desarrollar
were
esto.
offered to develop this. Thank you.
Anna, that's so powerful. I love that you just talked about moving through fear into a place of thinking about how this doesn't only, impact other people to get to know you, but it sounds like there was a lot of self-exploration. I love that imagery of the rebirth of new Anna, which is incredible. And as someone that knew you before the fellowship, I think you were already a very powerful organizer, a poderosa in your own right. But yes, I love that that's how that process was for you. Who else would like to share? Candido,
Gracias.
I see your hand.
Sí, gracias.
Yes, thank you. Well, for me to tell my story was not easy because since I work in construction, telling a story is like reaching a house and they give it to you and they say, here's this house and we want you to make it ready for painting. But it has so many square meters and you don't know where to start. And this is the hard thing about telling a story because you don't know from what point to start. But once you start, you go through a process, and this process takes you to the end, and the end can be 1,000 pages of writing. So much comes out of your mind that you can't even stop it. In that time, I'm going to, this time I'm going to tell my story again. And I made changes. I made lots of changes that maybe when I tell the story, I'm not even going to tell the story the way I have it written, because why? Because the mind is so changing and so brilliant that even though we're talking about our reality and our truth, there's always some moment that changes. And so this is the surprising thing for me, to participate and to tell a story which I represent. I represent my life, but at the same time, I'm trying to explain, show also that life changes. It's always changing. It was so important for me to receive this workshop, this fellowship. I put it into practice every day, and I thank the program for having invited me.
Thank you so much, Candido. I loved your imagery as well of where do we start? You know, you're painting this huge house, and where do you start? And it made me think of how often we also say, I don't have a story. I don't have anything to tell. And really, it's like we have so many stories. And, you know, just even you saying like, my story is also, I'm speaking for all these other community members and all these other people as well. My story is ours, is the story of us too, is really amazing. So thanks, Candido. Yeah, Calypso.
Hi, y'all. I'm Kara Calypso Levi. My experience from the Always Essential Fellowship, I oftentimes would always, you know, big up other domestic workers. And I would kind of put my own stories to like the background. Like my story is, you know, I'm out here fighting for this domestic worker. I'm out here fighting for this domestic worker, or, you know, this domestic worker has a different story from my own, not really realizing that my own story could be told in a way, you know, to push what we were fighting for. I came from National Domestic Workers Alliance, whoop, whoop. And I, like a lot of domestic workers, got into the work starting my own business. So I wasn't necessarily, you know, someone who was out here making $10 an hour or $7.25 getting my wages stolen. I was, you know, the small business owner who was trying to figure things out and, you know, price myself right and not get taken advantage of. And like, even before that, the story that brought me to domestic work was, you know, being a single Black mom who fought with corporate America, trying to, you know, go up the corporate ladder, having these supervisory jobs and not getting paid my worth. And then finally, you know, saying, you know, screw this shit. I'm going to go do my own thing. That way I can get my time back and still be able to provide for my family. So I feel like my time in the fellowship, it finally helped me, you know, tell my story, figure out what my story is. And even now to this day, like my story is ever changing. At the time that we did the fellowship, we were in the process of getting the Harris County Essential Workers Board passed by, you know, Harris County. And I was able to take some of the skills that I was learning in this fellowship and, you know, use those for telling my story before the commissioner's court. And so this fellowship, you know, helped send me in that direction where now we have this, the first of its kind board in the country. And then not only, you know, passing this board, but also my commissioner recognized me from when I spoke before, you know, before them to get this board passed and appointed me as, you know, the representative on the board. It opened that door for me, as well as, you know, I eventually landed a labor organizer role. And currently to this day, I am now a political field director for a candidate that's running out in Harris County. Like me being able to tell my story, me opening up and realizing that I have my own story and it's not just about other people. Like there's power in my story. My experience might look different, but it's also the same. Like there's power in my story, and you know, the things that we picked up in the fellowship, being able to like check somebody's biases because they might not realize that they have, you know, racial biases or gender biases or whatever, being able to check people within that space when we had small groups and let them know, hey, like your thinking is fucked up, for lack of a better word. Like, I really enjoyed my time in the fellowship, and it's put me, like, my life has changed for the better because of some of the skills that I learned in the fellowship. You know, being able to tell my story wherever I go, whatever the situation is. You know, this story might not be the same as that story, but they're all my stories, and the skills I learned have helped me, you know, grow as a person. So I appreciate the fellowship. Like, yeah, I'm political field director.
Well,
So yeah.
we're really proud of you, Calypso, and I think what you're saying is also a good example of just how so many people also felt like, while it seems like on the surface you're just learning to tell a story, what you're actually doing is learning so much more in ways that made you feel empowered and allowed you to vision something bigger for yourself. And you did. You're a great example, and you're one of a lot of our fellows that have gone on to do amazing things that we're really proud of, and for all of our fellows who are still on that journey. So thanks. And Sharon, I saw your hand up.
Hola, buenas noches. Feliz de que
Hello,
me hayan
good
invitado.
evening.
Muchas
A
gracias.
pleasure to be invited. Thank
Este
you so
programa
much.
me animó
What I
un curso
can
que ya lo
say,
recuerdo, creo que 2 añitos atrás,
I think I
porque
took this
quería
course
contar
2 years
cosas que
ago
sentía y no
because
sabía cómo
there were
decirlas.
so many things I wanted to
Y
say and I didn't know how to say
no voy
them.
a negar un poquito de vergüenza porque lo que me pasó
I'm
hace
not
mucho tiempo no
going
lo debe saber
to
nadie.
deny it. I was
Y
a
quiero
little
empezar
bit
diciendo que
embarrassed because I
estoy
felt like
muy
nobody should know
orgullosa
about it. I was a little bit,
y,
I didn't want to
y,
make
y
people
es
sad
curioso
either.
y esto pasa en Estados Unidos
And I
donde
was
se
like, if this
escucha,
happens in the United
creo que debe
States,
ser mejor
where I
porque
think
es un
things should be
tercermundista
better.
y no podía creer tantas
And
cosas que nos pasan
I
cuando uno
couldn't
llega a
really
cualquier país
believe of all the things that
y
happen
ser
to you when
pobre
you
tiene una
first
ventaja
come to the
terrible
States.
y
And
ser
to be
pobre
poor,
es
it's
ser
a
un cero a la izquierda de la
very bad
sociedad, de la
you're at a
comunidad,
very bad
de nadie le
disadvantage.
importa
You're
lo que
basically
pueda pasarte.
don't count in the community. Nobody really
Cuando te
cares if
acercas a
anything
las
happens
leyes
to you.
tampoco
And when it comes to the
están
laws,
haciendo
I
realmente
don't
su
think they
trabajo.
are doing
La
their
policía,
work. And
creo
the
que no nací
police,
en mi situación,
I don't
entonces
think I
no podía creerlo
saw it in
cuando
my
empecé a
situation, so I couldn't
y
really
empecé a
believe it.
hablar
So I
con la
started to,
gente
so I
como
took the
que con
course and I started to tell
confianza,
my story, especially
me
once
hice
I
desahogar y ya he logrado
had some trust
contar mi
with some
historia
people,
y cuando me
and
toque mi
I
turno,
wanted to let it out of my
feliz y
chest,
quiero seguir
and
adelante
I
y espero
started
que
to tell my
podamos
story,
lograr algo
and
que
I
nos dé a
want
las
to
mujeres en la parte
continue
más
to
segura
push forward
y como el
until
poder de poder
all of us
poder
women will
tener la
feel more
vergüenza ni el
self
miedo ante decir y
assured
hablar las
and to be
cosas.
empowered, to not
Muchas
be
gracias.
afraid to tell our story and say things that we want to say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Sharon. And you know what I heard also in what you were saying is also just the way in which storytelling, especially in collective ways, was really healing and allowed us to feel like there was power in being able to share our experiences, even when they were traumatic. And, you know, I remember many of the stories that you shared in the fellowship were so difficult to share, but at the same time brought so many of us, particularly the other women and the other immigrant women in the fellowship, together. And I just really appreciate you calling that out today and really like naming that experience for yourself. Okay, Jay Lopez, you are our last person. We want to hear from you. What was it like putting your story together?
Can you guys hear me? You can? Okay, cool. So I think, you know, like I didn't prepare anything for this answer, but I think for me, to put that story together that I did, it for one made me realize, like, kind of like Javier was saying earlier, how much I was like focused on the story of my workplace and what was going on there and what Amazon was doing bad and so on and so forth, that having that prompt of like a time when you felt powerful, right? And a time that you felt weak, I think were the prompts. Like really like just like some self-discovery about being vulnerable with people. And I think that was like super important for me, because then I went on to do some like organizer and training stuff with the organization that I was working with, workers at Amazon. So I went on to do one-on-ones with my coworkers and then even outside of the building. And, you know, they put me in the field, if you will, right? And it was like super important to me to recognize how hard it was for me to tell my story just in that moment, because like when I'm going to go out here and agitate workers and what I need them to tell me and what I need them to feel is how I felt basically telling that story. And it's so much more than just what's going on at work, that it's super important, I think, for anybody that's going to be in that field to kind of experience.
I love that, because, you know, something that Javier always taught us was that the skill of learning how to tell our stories isn't just, you know, internal, but it also is about learning how to listen to other people's stories. So I love that, because I feel like you exemplified that perfectly. Well, thank you all so much. I know that we would love to sit and chat with you all for the rest of the night, but actually we want to get into the story slam part, and we want to hear some stories. So I know we're going to hear some of the stories of the folks here on this panel, including a few others. So again, thank you all so much for joining us for this and sharing what it was like for you. And we are going to hand it back over to MaryGrace to hear you all share your stories with us.
Here, I think I'm going to pass it straight away to you. You ready?
Yeah. All right. So for everyone, so when we do story slams, I always say to folks that everyone has a role here, because we're about to hear personal stories from folks who were part of the fellowship. But the listener also has a very important job, because storytelling, again, like speechifying, when I give a speech, I can give a speech out, and people might be listening, might not, but when you're telling a story, it's about both the storyteller and the listener. And as I said before, although we all tell stories all the time, the difference in this instance is that you're sort of highlighting you're vulnerable in front of other people you don't know. And so the job that everyone else on the Zoom has, and we do this in person when I do this in stages with like hundreds of people in the audience, but even on a Zoom, we're gonna fill this space with love for each of these storytellers, because this is hard to do. And so so I always say I'm Puerto Rican and my language of love is loud. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is as we call up storytellers, is for everyone to go off mute for a second as we welcome people. So our first storyteller is Minor Alvarez. Minor is and so yes, everyone, come on, fill the space with love.
Woo! Yes, so.
Thank you.
There we go. There we go. See, it's not on Zoom. Doesn't sound necessarily pretty, but it's noisy. That's great. So Minor was with the Workers Defense in Houston, and was a part of the second year of the fellowship, and was a pleasure to work with. So without further ado, los dejo con Minor.
Hola a todos, saludos.
Hello, everyone. My regards. I am thankful for the opportunity to tell my story. As a child in Guatemala, every time I would hear the sound of an airplane, it was a party for me and everybody in my block to see how it was flying across the blue sky and how I will get lost between the clouds. And always I thought I would be a part of that voyage. I know what you're thinking, but in during my time there was no plasma TVs or tablets or iPhones, and there was not even social media, which is why whenever an airplane flight above us, it was quite an episode. So my parents got married when they were 16 years of age. My mom gave birth to me on September 21st of 19. I am the oldest of eight. We are five males and three females. And like I said earlier, during that time there was not a whole lot of TVs. I was born in a town called Quetzaltenango in Central America in Guatemala. It's a city of 23, 30 meters above sea level. It's a valley surrounded by mountains and volcanoes. When I was about a year and a half, something happened that affected my life forever. I ended up with measles. Uh, this was a viral infection that is very contagious that affects children, and it can cause severe health problems, including ear infection, blindness, pneumonia, encephalitis, which is inflammation of the brain. Some of these complications can also end in death. I was very ill for many days. I come from a family with limited resources, and of course, in our country, there's not a very good health care system until today. I was very severe with my illness to the point that my eyes had a such infection that they looked like two egg yolks that were red. So my right eye literally exploded. I spent many, many months weak and sick, fighting for my life on a bed. My dad told me that he would pray God to take me away because I was suffering. It was a miracle that I started to gain my health slowly, but I lost my right eye forever. So I've had a lot of really strong emotions as a little kid. Loneliness, it's one of them. My first couple of years, I had to deal with this feeling. I was bullied. I was, and people make fun of the way I would look because of the mark that my illness left me. This was my childhood. One of the desires of my parents was to have a eye prosthetic, and that's when we were able to find out through some missionaries that traveled to Guatemala. They said that in this country there would be a higher chance to find a proper prosthesis that was not an glass eyeball. And since then, I ended up with that dream of coming to this country. At the end of 2005, I traveled from Guatemala to Houston, and to be inside an airplane was a very exciting experience. I sat next to a window and I was basically looking out a window since we took off till we landed. It was some of the best hours of my life. I was literally above the clouds, above the ocean, above the mountains. I arrive with a luggage full of dreams and illusions, and that trip was a straight flight without any layovers, which made me feel powerful. I arrived to this country as an immigrant without knowing the language, the system, or how to drive a car. And I needed to relearn a trade in order to survive. After being here for 5 months, I bought my first car. I still remember that car. It was an 89 Honda 4-door, no stereo, and the air conditioning didn't work. I overcome a lot of challenges and managed to achieve many dreams of mine. In 2014, I was able to have my prosthetic. So when I think back, I reflect, they my life was almost taken away, my eyesight. The voices that would tell me that I was not worth it and that I couldn't do it. The people that made me feel like I was not capable of doing anything, that's gone completely out of my life because I have a vision now. I know my strengths and my vulnerabilities. I am an active leader and I work for my community, being a voice of those who do not have a voice. And I've been part of this promotion of these classes of Always Essential. And I am a husband that is loved and that is being taken care of by a beautiful woman who assists me just the way I am. And all of this that I have shared with you has made me feel today a powerful person. And I'm gonna let you know something. This year, I'm going back to my country for the first time after 19 years. And I'm gonna hop on an airplane because I love to be up high. My name is Minor Alvarez, and this is my story.
Off mute. Off mute, everyone.
Muy
Bravo,
bien.
Minor.
That's
Yeah.
Excelente, excellent. Gracias, Minor. Yeah.
Thank you, Minor.
Thank you, everyone. Our next storyteller is Charity Wilson. Charity is a quality assurance professional with 14 years of hands-on laboratory experience and a reputation as a self-starter, a thorough reviewer and detailed investigator who takes great pride in being a resource and advocate for frontline workers, pursuing mutually beneficial relationships with their employers. She is a native Mississippian and alumni member of the world-renowned Fisk University Jubilee Singers. Charity is a lifelong learner with a love for the performing arts, and she says a mouth that often gets her into trouble, which is likely why she prefers to write. I will just add to Charity's bio that she swore up and down. She's like, I'm not a good speaker, I'm a good writer. And I said to her at one point in class, I think you're wrong about that. And I think you will agree. And so without further ado, Charity Wilson, fill the room with love for Charity, please.
Woo, Charity!
Charity. Oh, Charity.
Vamos, Charity.
Thank you, guys. It's so good to be back in this environment. My family, as always, is here on the call today. The story that I have, or my story rather, I've entitled Mississippi Learning. My family loves movies. I mean, we really love movies. In fact, when I was growing up, going to the theater is how we celebrated birthdays. So if it was my birthday, I got to pick a restaurant where I wanted to eat and a movie that I wanted to see, and my family pretty much had to oblige. Outside of presents, that was the extent of the birthday celebration, and we looked forward to it. One of the first movies I ever saw at the theater with my family, though I don't think it was for anyone's birthday, was when I was 8 years old, My older sister was 9 and my younger sister was 3. It was at the end of the year in 1988, and the movie was Mississippi Burning. Now, maybe that didn't really hit you the way it hit for me and my sisters at the time, and the way it resonates with us now as adults. So allow me to give you a little more context. The movie Mississippi Burning loosely depicts the FBI investigation into the 1964 disappearance and murder of 3 civil rights workers in Philadelphia, Mississippi at the start of Freedom Summer, which was a campaign to attempt to register as many Black voters as possible. The workers were Andrew Goodman and Michael Schwerner, 2 white males, and James Chaney, a Black male. Yep, a Black family, including 3 small children, living in the state of Mississippi, had a rated R night at the movies, watching a film on the investigation into the 3 race-based murders that occurred in that same state 20 plus years before. To say it was the night that my parents woke my sisters and I up is probably the most modern and politically correct way to put it. I was shook during that opening scene, and feelings of disdain grew within me for the next 2 hours. And when the movie ended and the lights came up, I couldn't help but look curiously into the white faces in the theater as they looked sheepishly back at me. Stay woke? Yeah, Mississippi Burning opened my eyes to the world around me. You see, not only did we live in Mississippi, a state that until 2013 had not ratified the 13th Amendment, outlawing slavery and involuntary servitude except as a punishment for a crime, we lived on one of those not so well lit country roads with at least one long stretch of overarching trees in between houses. A road that, as the movie depicted, was very similar to the one where Andrew Goodman, Michael Schwerner, and James Chaney were abducted and murdered. And though our white neighbors seemed nice from time to time, allowing their children to cross the tree line to play on our swing set, the slightest remark from one little girl reminded me that the house we lived in and the land that it sat on previously belonged to their family. Insert strong side eye. Listen, my younger sister says my parents were tripping, while my older sister thinks that they just didn't have a babysitter. I mean, the facts that the churches where we worshiped were very similar to the ones that during Freedom Summer in Mississippi were burned after potential Black voters gathered there, or that though my parents had attended segregated schools, my sisters and I were destined to attend the only high school in our town, an integrated public high school that held great pride in having one of the most colorful homecoming courts around, with a white queen and a Black queen and white and Black maids representing each tier. None of that meant anything, especially because the annual Stocker family reunions always reminded me that my mother's family can trace their history all the way back to a slave in the 1800s. My parents couldn't possibly have thought the story of Mississippi Burning would ever be of any importance to us. It was just another movie after all. But seriously, what were they thinking? Understand that my father in particular has always been outspoken, which makes him an excellent preacher. He says what he means and means what he says, but he mostly stays to himself these days and avoids conflict. And my mother, though a bit more soft-spoken, has advocated for increased teacher pay for as long as I can remember. In fact, one of my earliest memories is of her picketing in front of the Mississippi State Capitol building while pregnant with my younger sister. But somewhat surprisingly, when I started openly advocating for workers' rights, my mom encouraged me to practice caution because, in her opinion, my transition from relaxed to natural hair, along with my talks of starting a union, are what led to my departure from a previous workplace on a not so positive note. So, seriously, what was it all for? Why would my parents see fit to make us aware of and bear witness to societal struggles at such young ages? Why couldn't we have just watched My Little Pony and continue to live in blissful ignorance? Why ensure knowledge of so much history and still be afraid? My parents' response: because you needed to know.
Oh, thank you, Charity. Everyone off mute, please.
Let's go, Charity.
Bien, bien.
Powerful.
So I just thank you, Charity, and especially thank you because you reminded me a point that I didn't make earlier, which is often, so the part of the power of storytelling is that I think often in workers' rights, the stories we focus on or how we tell stories are sad stories or stories of victimization. And what I love about your story is that you managed to make us laugh about something really horrible, you know? And what I love about that is that that's how we actually live. That's how people actually live their lives, right? I just love so much your sisters like talking to each other, saying like, our parents were tripping. What are they thinking? But that's how we actually live our lives. And that's the true power of storytelling. So thank you so much for Charity. That's fantastic. So our next storyteller is Cándido Batiz. Cándido works with the Workers' Defense Project. He's originally from Honduras, but lives in Houston, has worked for 4 years with Workers' Defense, but also works in construction and fights for his and other people's rights. I had the pleasure of working with Candido on this story the first time and again this second time, so incredibly proud to introduce you all to Candido Batiz. Candido.
Bravo.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much.
Hoy mi,
Adelante, adelante, compañero.
gracias. Hoy mi historia va a ser un
My
poco
story was a
diferente.
little bit
Mi
different. My
nombre
name
es
is Candido Batiz Álvarez,
hijo de
son
Cándido Batiz Arriola y
of
Lidia
Candido
Esther
Batiz.
Álvarez. Soy de Honduras.
I'm from Honduras.
Soy de una
I'm from
etnia llamada garífuna.
of an ethnic group called Garifuna.
Los
The Garifunas
provienen
from
de una pequeña
a
isla
small island
cerca de Venezuela que se
Venezuela
llama San
called
Vicente.
San Vicente.
Soy un líder
I'm a leader
de la comunidad hispana aquí en
of the
Houston
Hispanic
por más de 6 años.
since 6
Y quiero compartir un poco
and I want
más
to share
de
a little
mí
bit
en la historia,
about myself.
ya que en el
Sorry,
slam pasado
because
hablé un poco más
last
sobre
time
mi
I
abuela.
talked more about my grandmother.
Yo nací en una de las ciudades,
I
una de
was
las 3
born
ciudades más
in
importantes
one
de
of the
Honduras.
3
Se llama La
main
Ceiba.
cities of Honduras. It's called La Ceiba.
A los 8 años
8
yo
years,
comencé a
when I was
trabajar
8 years old, I started to
porque mi
work
papá
because
tuvo
my
10
father
hijos,
had 10
yo era
children,
el segundo hijo mayor
and I was the second
y
oldest
pues
child.
con 10 hijos,
And
imagínate,
with 10 children,
tenía
and
que trabajar muy
I
duro,
had to
tenía 2
work
trabajos,
very hard. He had 2
mi mamá
jobs,
tenía 2 trabajos
other
y
had
eso
2 jobs,
significa de que pasaba muy poco tiempo con nosotros en casa.
and there was not much that we could do at
Al
home.
tener la oportunidad yo de trabajar, también tuve la oportunidad
And when I had
de
the
traer
time to work,
ingresos a la casa.
I was able to bring money home. With a little bit of money that I earned, I could buy rice, I could buy eat, I could even pay for the light electricity. As in Garifuna, I didn't feel any difference in mestizo and ethnic community because we didn't talk about that very much. When I started to hear about this Garifuna community, I wanted to know more about the Garifuna. And when I was 15 years old, I started to go to the community where my father had been. There I met his mother, who was my grandmother. She was 90 years old when I met her. My grandmother did not speak Spanish, which is the official language of Honduras. She spoke Caripuna, her maternal language. Caripuna is a mix of Spanish, English, and French. When I visited this community, I saw that life was completely different from how it is in the city with a mixed blood and mixed cultures. You lose your own culture. You don't live the culture the way you live it in the ethnic community because there's so many external. But when you reach out to the ethnic community, you see that it's not so much money that makes your needs, but sure, there the person who has more would give who had less or who didn't have anything. The children didn't know what it was to work. They only knew what it was to play. This difference for me is really hard because I started to work very young when I was 8 years old. And when I reached the community, the children were playing and enjoying. Adults worked the land and fished. And most beautiful of all this is that my grandmother Spanish, and I did not speak Garifuna because my parents never spoke to me in Garifuna. I had to learn to be able to communicate with my grandmother and others of the community because none of them spoke Spanish. And once I was able
When
to
I
have this
had that
conversation with them, they started to tell me
communication
the
with them,
stories of
they
how
were
they
sharing their
arrived
stories
to
of
San
how they arrived
Vicente
to San Vicente
and how their grandparents,
with
parents,
their
how how long it took them to reach
ancestors,
Honduras.
how long it
And
take for them to arrive to
this
Honduras.
opened for me a desire to
And
know
this
more
made me want to know more and more and more. But it was also not just knowing that, because there was a lot of things missing in the community. We didn't have electricity, we didn't have clean water or phone lines. It was zones that were very isolated and governments don't really pay attention to. As time passed, at the end of the year in December, I was there for like, 2 weeks or so to learn more about the community. And this made me want to grow in the community. I started to work with organizations, with Odeco, and the other one is Ofraden, to bring infrastructure in the community, sending letters to the Congress, bringing investments into the community, even though we tried to bring electricity to the community where my grandparents lived. And there was this need for me to know about my history and my community of my ancestors. It was very important for me to know this, or else I wouldn't have anything to fight for. It would only have been my mom and my dad, but they had a history before me. And we were able to help the community. We brought running water through these organizations. And what was most important is to learn how to speak Garifuna, or else I would have not been able to communicate with my grandmother and the other adult people in the community. One of the things that helped me also
fue que ellos cuentan las historias a través de la música. Cantando contaban las historias.
share their stories. And this was something beautiful to me whenever you would hear women and men sing, telling their stories when they were at sea, their lived experience. Today, I bring this because being Garifuna makes me proud. I live in Houston now, and I would like to be in Honduras and be fighting for my community, because even though we were able to bring electricity, something happened that the community went back to the same state as 40 years ago. They don't have running water or electricity because they're still marginalized by the government. Because they created in me a leadership to be able to fight for them. This I carry within my heart. I might be far away, but my heart is always there with them, because I want to see that community better. I was not born there. My dad was born there. My mother was born there. And I feel impotent not being able to be there because I came to the country of opportunity, but I'm not able to do anything to help my community in my country, the Garifana. And thank you for hearing me out and listening to me. Thank you, Candido.
Woo!
Candido. Awesome.
Excellent. And hooray for Garifunas.
Sons who live in Colombia, who studied at the university, and I want to say at the beginning of Sharon's story that, like many stories about what it's like to be a working poor person, there are very hard themes in the story. Including violence and the possibility of sexual violence. And so just want to let folks know to take care of themselves, or if you want to mute a little, but it's a very incredibly powerful story of moving from powerlessness to power. So so with that, Sharon.
Woo!
Hola, buenas noches. Hola, hola. Efectivamente, mis dos niños les da por entrar a la universidad al tiempo. Yo dije, no, en Colombia no voy a poder pagar sin casitamente una y con todas las necesidades del caso. Entonces llego a Houston.
And I don't know anybody, but then I made note where it's cheaper because I didn't have a whole lot of money. The idea was to work to send money to Colombia, especially because of my children, that they were my motivation or are my motivation. So the first thing is to figure out where I can live with like $300 that I've had, which was nothing. It's a lot down there, but here it was really not much. And I went to this place out of 59 North. It was a very cheap place. I was happy. And I slept on the floor. And of course, I took my clothes out of my luggage and make that a bed. And like we all do it at the beginning without a car and see how you're gonna eat marucha and learning little by little. I've noticed that where I live, yes, it is cheap. That's where the poor people live that we cannot afford anything else. So during the night, there was a group of neighbors that was like a house with 4 entrances, and each one had their own room. In front, there was a trailer and then another trailer, and it was pretty open field, dirt road. It was cheap though. And I would see how they would meet and they would start exchanging drugs and money. And I was like, wow, the police should get here because they're selling drugs. Police never made it there. And that smelled like pot. But I was like, man, this was not a good place. And then I would see them with handguns and they would carry them around their waist. And I would be like, we don't even see this in Colombia because in Colombia you cannot have a weapon because of the cartels. You wouldn't see things like here. Like, look at my weapon. And then I have read, things, but it's not like, people would get drunk and like bring their weapons out and start shooting up in the air. Like you were never hear and see about any of that. And I was like, wow. And then I was like, well, I wanted to leave the place but they would cover the exit. And then when you would walk by them, you would be bothered and harassed. And I was waiting for the police to put them in order, but no. Definitely, I realized that being poor and feeling like you have nothing to do and you cannot do anything for yourself at that time, that's a bad start. I couldn't believe it. And felt and saw that they had a weapon. How do you tell the police if you can actually provoke a shooting? And then how would you feel about that? So that would be terrible. Finally, someone told me, I arrived here after Harvey and there was a lot of destruction. And they were like, look, they're helping people, with construction. And I was like, well, there's no cement here. And here everything's made out of sheetrock and everything's super easy to do. So I said, you know what? I'm going to go and look for work. And then my kids will be like, I need food, I need money, because I was supposed to be sending money, but I had a hard time finding work. As a woman, the men make 100 and women make 60, and you'll be doing the same thing. Regardless, it was money. So after working for 2 weeks to clean up at different job sites, it's also pretty sad work environment. And then the second week comes and I don't get paid, and I'm like, holy shit. And my kids were like, can you please send us money? And I was in need as well of many things. And I was like, after a while, I moved to a different trailer. And it was not so much in terms of drugs and firearms, but there was a lot of construction workers. And one of my coworkers took me there. It was a little bit cheaper, but people would drink every day. There was no organization or anything like that. And after living there for 2 months, I would give them like installments, like $20, $30 per week, sometimes 50. But I was earning like 200, 300. It was pretty sad. And he would be, don't worry about it. You can pay rent later. And he was so kind. I would be, okay, I'd rather send money to my country and I give him a little bit as payment. And he will say, just hold on, you'll get something better. And I've noticed that he started looking at me, like analyzing me quite a lot, like harassing me, like in a morbid way. And I was like, man. And he started being very caring towards me and giving me beer, and I kind of knew and felt how things were going to be with this guy. And around 6 p.m., I got home, I opened up, and the guy had keys to that trailer. And since I was outside, I felt like they opened the room, and I got up because I saw the guy open my door of my bedroom, and he had pulled his pants down, and he said, you can pay me in this way and we can call it even, and I can stay there as long as I wanted. And we exchanged words that I'm not gonna say here because nobody should know about them. And I basically cussed him out, and he started cussing me out too. He even pushed me and hit me. We ended up exchanging fist, and I was like, what's going on here? And why are these things happening to you? And who are you going to go to? I apologize. And okay. So I hit him, he fell to the floor. He picked up a shovel and tried to hit me with it. So I ran out, and there was a gas station where all the drunk people would go and buy a 12-pack and 6-pack, and they would be, hey, Blondie, how come you're crying? And I said, well, because someone stole from me and this and that. And they're like, oh, no, here's 5, here's 10. And I was like, that's a blessing. I think I was out till like 6 or 7 a.m. and I made like $400. It was way better than when I worked, thank God. So when 7 a.m. came along, I saw that the guy was not there. So I went in and grabbed all my stuff, my luggage, and I left. And along the way, there was a girlfriend that would come to visit him from Honduras. She was really nice. And she will call me, hey, Colombian, where are you going? And I told her, I don't want to live there. And she's like, what happened? And I said, well, there's rats, and I don't like rats. And she was like, I know this place. So she took me to another place, to another room. I continued to work. So I got to meet a coworker who's here that is very sweet, Candido. And we both basically got robbed, like, and also some, and he was like, this happens a lot. And he said, there's a place that you can call and you can make a difference. You can be heard. So you can lose your fear, because those are things that I didn't want to share with people. And I went to the organization and I put all my heart and soul so that we can do something in the future with God's blessing and through all of our strength so we can change laws, or at least they can put offices so that people can complain about sexual harassment or in wage theft of everything that happens with new immigrants that arrive here. So thank you to these courses, to the invitations that the organizations extend to me, to the things that I've learned. Thank you all for the labor defense organization, for all of you. I feel safe and I can speak with people, and I don't think this would happen again to me again. This was my story. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sharon.
Gracias.
We love you, Sharon. Thank you, Sharon, for sharing your vulnerability and for sharing your story. And I said it in the chat in English, I'll say it here in Spanish. But last night when we spoke, I said it's the first time that I'm hosting a story slam where one of the narrators is a character in another person's story. Because if you didn't catch it, Candido is the workmate that took Sharon, that helped Sharon in her moment of feeling powerless to feeling with her power. Thanks to both of you.
Thanks everyone for your patience. We're running a little over, but as you can tell, like fantastic stories. Our next storyteller gonna have give the same warning that deals with tough issues, including of sexual violence. That Bobby. And so again, if you want to mute for a second, and come back, please feel free to do that. Bobby Penland Zemkowski is an advocate for all those who are exploited or marginalized. She's worked in retail for over 30 years and is active in her church. She also says, that I am a geek, active in my geeky community. I love art, music, photography, cosplaying, travel, history, social justice, and being active in our small local church. And without further ado, Bobby, welcome back, Bobby. So great to see you.
Good to see you. Yes, Bobby. Before I tell my story, I've got to tell you, I had it written down. My final draft, I drafted like 9 different times until I got it right, and Javier really helped me with that. So what I want to say is, I was looking at this first page, and down at the bottom, it's kind of smeared because the last time I told my story, there was tears. So, anyway, basically it started when I was 5 years old, and my innocence was shattered in pieces. That's when the sexual abuse started, and it lurked under the surface and in the dark edges and corners of my entire childhood. Life wasn't all bad. I was resilient and I was loved. My mom was wonderful, and I was determined to make life better when I get bigger. Growing up, we were very poor. I was called poor white trash, dirty little hillbilly hick. I didn't have shoes most of the time. Shoes were just for school. We lived in a trailer park, but we couldn't afford a trailer. So there were like 4 shacks along the side of the trailer park, and we lived in one of those. And there were times when we didn't have a meal, or like sometimes, and my mom always tried to make the best of it. She would put mustard, like a mustard smiley face, on a piece of toast and call it mustard pizza. And she just made it kind of special, but it was still hard. And I can remember sitting outside in the dirt, in the shade, and just crying because I was hungry. But I was told, even at that young age, life isn't fair. but I disagreed. I felt like life could be fair, but people chose not to make it fair, and I wasn't going to do that. So that kind of made me the person that I, wanted to be, as far as, like, for example, on my 5th birthday, my best friend Danny and I were celebrating my birthday, and one of the gifts I'd gotten was this box of like costume jewelry. And amongst the costume jewelry were pairs of clip-on earrings. And I had never noticed before. And we had been friends for probably 3 years by then. I had never noticed she only had one ear. She had a birth defect, and on the one side, there was no ear there. And I was so upset, not because she had any kind of disability. It didn't cross my mind. I was upset because it was not fair that she could only wear one earring. So I took the earrings out of the thing, and I wore one and she wore the other. So each pair I split between us so that it would be fair. All during this time, that abuse kept going, but I was learning to just pretend everything was fine. I compartmentalized it. I put it away from me, contained it, and my life went on. My mom instilled in me, she told me that it was better to be part of the solution than part of the problem. And that really stuck with me. There was one day when I was in grade school, and we had a guest speaker from the Wholesome Bakery. And when he was done with his presentation, he would ask trivia questions. And if we got them right, we would get a loaf of bread. I got one of the questions right, and I got that loaf of bread, and I was so proud. I like strutted my way home from school with that loaf of bread, and proudly, because I could contribute to the family with that loaf of bread. It was one of my little highest childhood moments. Then when I got into 4th grade, that's when I started being able to, I found out if we worked in the cafeteria during our lunch hour, then we would work while the serving was going on, and then we got served and we could go sit down. So if we worked in the cafeteria, we got a free lunch. So it was an opportunity for me. We were on a free lunch program, but I was so teased and so embarrassed and so humiliated on that. And just, they picked on me so much that I thought, this is a way for me to earn my own keep or pull my weight. And there were some good things about it. When you're the one that hands out the French fries and you see your friend coming through the line, you give them a little extra French fries. It's a little bit of, street cred. But looking back at it now from a different perspective, I was child labor, and no child should have to work to earn food. So it's just a different way of thinking. I'm also very, very empathetic. I can really feel what other people are going through and empathize with them and just feel their pain like it's my own. And I've always thought of it as being like a gift or a superpower. But I'm realizing now that it was born out of constant trauma and fear and stress. But just because it was born out of that trauma doesn't mean I can't treat it like a superpower. So I think I've earned that. So that's what I do. The empathy was so strong, though, that it kind of would get me in trouble sometimes. When I was in school, I got called in the office one day at school by the principal. Another parent had called. So the other parent was there, and my mom was there, and the principal, and the mother was concerned that her child was stealing my toys because I was giving them away. So they had to sit me down and have a talk with me that I couldn't be giving away all my toys. My mom worked really hard for that. So it's just, if I had something that I was really happy to have, if somebody else thought, well, I would really love to have one of those, I could empathize with that so much that I'm like, I want to give them my joy. So I would do that. And like I said, it It caused a little trouble, but I don't regret it. So I can say that, yes, my innocence was shattered. But like a stained glass window, all those little pieces have been put back together to make something beautiful. There's still those black areas lurking around the edges that are like the black leading in a stained glass window. There's scar tissue that holds everything together. But now I can embrace those imperfections that make me this masterpiece that I am, with a huge heart and a passion to stand up for others the way I wish someone would have stood up for me. So that was my original story. And I just wanted to add to it for those of you who heard the first time around, that one of the things I loved so much about this whole fellowship was not only did I get to use my storytelling, like, you know, when we went to Detroit and we were working on trying to get a bill passed for guaranteed severance, but more important for me is that reflection and that understanding and examining myself and seeing how amazing I am and how I've managed to weather all of that and come out beautiful on the other side. I finally was able to tell my mom about the abuse, and she confronted my dad, and the truth is all out. And now we're all in this big healing process. And I wouldn't have been able to speak up or stand up for myself like that if it hadn't been for this fellowship. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Bobby.
Yeah. Wow, Bobby.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you, Bobby.
Part. And just thank you so much for sharing that. Wow. Wow. You are that incredible person that you described. So we have two more storytellers. Our next storyteller is Sarah Woodhams. Now, I don't have a bio for Sarah, but I'll just tell you, Sarah is a badass. Sarah, she was part of the first fellowship, and you'll see her badassness in the story she tells, and I'll just let you do that, Sarah.
Bienvenida, Sara. Welcome.
Thank you for that amazing introduction, Javier. I was in the first year of the program, and I still hear Javier's voice in my head whenever I'm putting a story together. So thank you. You live rent-free in my head from now on. So I worked at Babies R Us for 7 years until it closed in 2018. I loved the company. To me, it was more than just a job. I was a baby registry supervisor and in charge of running all the events as well as the social media for the stores. I put together our charity events. I helped customers from when they first found out they were pregnant all the way till their children were toddlers. I got to watch these families grow. I had customers that, you know, I got to see their children's first steps. It was so amazing working there. Toys R Us was a unique company where we had specialists in each area, and we were trained in every department. And I took a lot of pride in knowing that we were guiding people through these very special milestones and moments of their lives, including my own. In 2018, I was a newlywed. I was trying to buy our first house, and I was pregnant with my son, Gabriel. I know my coworkers felt the same way because we had been working there for over 20 years, or many of them had been working there for over 20 years, and we had become a family. Many of them were at my wedding and my baby shower. I found out that Toys R Us had declared bankruptcy on Facebook while I was in the hospital recovering from going into preterm labor and losing my son Gabriel. Corporate had not even told the employees first, so we all found out through the news. I had just lost my son, and I had a $1,500 ambulance bill that I was stuck with. And I was told that if we wanted to get the severance that we had been promised, we had to work till the end. So while I was still grieving my son, I went back early. I didn't have time to heal. And I worked every single day. I dealt with angry customers and other liquidation groups to make sure that I got paid. However, at the end, that didn't happen. Wall Street execs, KKR and Bain, private equity and hedge funds had all cashed out, got bonuses, and then told us, the workers, that we were getting nothing and they were canceling our severance. On top of that, unemployment was so high in Pennsylvania at the time that unemployment was overburdened and got cut. And we almost lost our apartment. If it hadn't been for the kindness of the parents at my eldest daughter's school, we wouldn't have had a Christmas dinner. This bankruptcy destroyed me and my family's life, along with 33,000 other families. And I decided I wasn't going to take that sitting down. I hooked up with United for Respect on Facebook. They invited me out to an action in New Jersey, and I didn't know any of these people. They were all just people that I complained about the situation with online, but I decided to make the drive out to New Jersey. I was absolutely mortified when they asked me to speak. I hadn't really spoken in front of a group, and they wanted to tell my story about my son, which at the time, I hadn't even talked about it out loud yet. But some of the amazing leaders walked me through writing out the story and then encouraged me to step out in front of everyone at the action. We had flash mobbed a Toys R Us store that was still closing, and there were well over 200 people there. And my voice was shaking as I started my story, but then yelling by the end. I couldn't even see the crowd because I was crying. But by the time I wiped my tears away, I looked up and saw everyone in the crowd was crying and grieving with me. I had a new family. In that moment, I decided I was going to fight until private equity and the hedge funds that destroyed us made this right for us. We won $22 million. That was just a drop in the bucket, but it was a historic win. We started helping people that were losing their jobs to Wall Street greed, like Sears and PetSmart. And I was really proud to win a little bit of relief and help those people find their own voices. We even introduced a bill, the Stop Wall Street Looting Act, and inspired new legislation all over the country. And with my new family, we accomplished so much. And we're still going. We still have so much to do. And then in 2019, my daughter Amelia was born, and many of my new family were at the baby shower.
Let's hear it for Sarah. And I told you she was a badass.
Sarah.
Sarah won some victories, y'all. Let me tell you, this place moved mountains.
Yep. She was Sarah's story. As I said, we always encourage people to focus on moments outside of work, but like her story about literally being pregnant and suffering what she suffered at that very moment when this was happening, like work and life were intimately tied. The fact that Sarah, that you made lemonade, not just lemonade out of those lemons, but have become a badass leader as a result of that horrible trauma, is just a testament to how amazing you are. So thank you so much for sharing. Now, our last story of the evening is a bit of a treat and a little different. So our last storyteller is Jay Lopez, and what we're going to show you is actually the Jay's story from. We're going to show you a video of when Jay shared his story as part of the Story Slam. So this is our last storyteller tonight, and you will get a taste of what the Story Slam was like at the end of the fellowship. So I'll pass it. I think MaryGrace, you're sharing screen. There you go. Everyone, please off mute and on camera. Fill the room with love for Jay.
Go Jay!
Go
Jay!
Here
we go!
Oh, Jay.
Bravo, Jay. Go.
Yeah, let's go.
Dale, Jay.
Let's do it. Bravo.
Let's run with
All right, you can hear me?
Yep.
Cool. All right. Kodak. It's September 2006. I'm 17. I'm on a long bus ride home from meeting my dad in San Francisco for the first time ever. I was told he didn't work much growing up. He starts a new job the day after I get there. Every opportunity I get, I snap photos of us and my family I never knew. 4 brothers, one conveniently the exact same age as me, which at the time I thought was awesome. I snap photos of me and my grandmother and my brothers and their mom, 2 cousins that I got really close with while I was there, all using a Kodak point and shoot I spent most of my travel money on at a Dollar General. I smile at none of them. I wake back up in St. Louis. My camera had been stolen on the bus. I don't hear from my dad again. I still don't. Pintex. It's 2010. I had just woke up from having stayed the night at the time my girlfriend / baby mama's house the night before. I really needed food and maybe a Gatorade. But not only for the hangover, it was because I hadn't eaten. As the day before I had been arrested at my grandmother's house. At around 10 a.m., 3 officers would arrest me on her porch, not for a crime, but for an outstanding traffic ticket for failure to register my illegally sold and busted vehicle. I used all my cash and called my boss, who I know would rather come and get me and front me the rest of the cash I needed than to try to find another manager to cover the coming overnight shift at IHOP. He paid. He came, he paid, and he left. I call out. I walk back to jail to my grandmother's house on Jacobs Lane. Like I said, it's morning and I needed food, bad. I'm excited, my taxes should have landed, and I'm hungry, but I can't find my wallet. I left it at my grandmother's house. I drive to her place, my license plates still unregistered. I get pulled over, but not on the way, right in front of her house. Not just my grandmother's house, but the house I grew up in. However early it is, the little brothers and sisters of all my friends are walking to the bus. The warrant I had just bailed out on the day prior must have not registered, because now here comes another squad car and the captain's SUV. All I can think of is these guys have nothing better to do. My friend's parents are outside with their kids waiting on the bus, one of which parents had previously rescued myself and her son from a Blockbuster and told me, "Of course they think you're stealing. Look how you're dressed." I, at the time, had never stolen in my life. His sister also once told me my kind wasn't allowed on her side of the street. My locks are long and unkept. I'm in a tall tee and sweatpants, handcuffed and embarrassed in the middle of my childhood street alongside 3 officers. The buses come, the parents leave. They let me go with a handful of tickets that I have zero intention on paying. I knew who I am, but my neighborhood had confirmed who they had been saying I was. I used my tax money to buy a Pentax KX camera. It's glossy and white. I nickname it Stormtrooper and enroll in the Academy of Art University in San Francisco, thinking maybe I'd call my dad. I don't. Nikon. It's winter 2011. I buy a new Nikon around my 21st birthday. We have twins due in January. Work, school, bills, doctor appointments, kids. I can't keep up. The girls, being twins, they come early. Just 3 days after my birthday. They're premature, and Aaliyah stays in the NICU for 2 weeks while Layla gets to go home. I stay with her as much as possible. I don't believe in God. I pray anyway. Not that she'd be okay, but that she would never feel abandoned like I felt in those moments without my parents being there for us in these moments. I sell my new Nikon to pay an attorney to hopefully stop getting arrested for those tickets I never did pay. My kids' mom and I split. I cut my locks in case I have to go to court for custody. Luckily, we don't. Full frame. It's 2021. My grandmother passes from COVID after suffering from dementia. For the better part of the decade, I had been Steve or Jim for quite a while now, so I tell myself I'm happy she passed. I've been coaching my son and networking in football in my area for a while. I adopt my little but bigger, goofier brother to give him access to a better school and help him play football. He had not been to school in 2 years. The lady I'm seeing has an abortion. She wants more children, but not yet. I completely support her, but I decided I never wanted to repeat that again, and I get a vasectomy. She's upset. We eventually split. After those 2 losses, I decided that the everyday grind wasn't how I was going to continue to live. I'm 30. I'm working way too much to still not have enough, and not doing anything I desire. I make it a goal to start doing things I had somehow convinced myself I wasn't good enough to do, like public speaking, leading, or even painting my own house. Out of fear that maybe they were right. Maybe I should just stay on my side of the road. We move into a house on 5th Street. 2022, Fujifilm. I head coach a football team. I lead a group of workers to organize and speak out against one of the biggest companies of our time. We go on strike, and I do way more public speaking than I could ever imagine. I buy my dream camera. 2023, Jacobs and 5th. Today, I own my own photography studio called Jacobs and Fifth. In those moments where I undoubtedly felt powerless and angry, and they all subsequently made me feel powerful. Every time inspired me to do better, and that regardless of how I dress or how long and unruly my locks are, I'll see myself part of these streets that I now own a name of, and my kids will never have to worry about a lost photo.
Thank you, Jay. Jay still, yes, some noise for Jay.
Yes. Nice, Jay.
Jay is still on, so take a bow, sir.
Yes.
Jay.
I love that story, and I love the repetition of the cameras, just so beautiful, Jay. So thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, so that Jay was our last storyteller, and so thank you all. Thanks for staying a little late, and we genuinely appreciate everyone's attention. And thank you again to all of our storytellers, all of the fellows from all three cohorts. And it really was to me I am tearing up, because it's hearing you all talk about how important the fellowship was here. I need you to know how important this was for me, and how much I grew even tonight, just listening to your stories over again, and for the ones I'm listening and hearing for the first time. So thank you all, and we will be seeing you all very, very soon. So thanks so much, and good night, everyone. And again, thanks for staying late. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye,
everyone.
Awesome.
Gusto de verles a todos.
So nice to see you all.
Good night. Thank you. I've missed you guys.
We've missed you.
Bye.